6 missiles, fired on the morning of August 8 between 9:25 and 12:51 from a single S-400 position on Russia's Black Sea coast. The very next night, Ukrainian drones reached that exact position and burned it for 3 hours. But here's the detail that makes this strike genuinely remarkable, not just tactically but symbolically. That S-400 wasn't guarding a military base, an airfield, or a city. It was sitting on the shoreline at Gelendzhik, protecting the airspace over a sprawling, heavily guarded Black Sea estate that's widely reported to be Vladimir Putin's own private palace. Stay with me, because the way Ukraine got to this specific battery, and what it took to clear the way there, tells you a great deal about how far this air defense degradation campaign has actually progressed. My name is Ben Hodges. I spent close to 3 decades in uniform, and there are very few targets in any war that carry quite this much symbolic weight, layered on top of the tactical value. An S-400 battery is always a significant target. An S-400 battery specifically positioned to protect the personal residence of a head of state is a different kind of statement entirely. Quick thing before I get into it. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, because I break down strikes like this one in full detail, not just the headline. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I always like seeing how far this channel reaches. Now, let's walk through exactly what happened. In this video, I'm covering the strike on the Gelendzhik S-400 itself, the electronic warfare system that had to be cleared out first to make this strike possible. The broader haul of air defense targets hit in the same overnight operation, and what repurposing an air defense system for offensive strikes tells us about where Russia's missile inventory actually stands right now. Let's start with the target and the strike itself. Overnight on August 8th into the 9th, Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, specifically the 413th Separate Regiment, call sign Reed, struck a position of the S-400 Triumf long-range surface-to-air missile system at Gelendzhik on Russia's Krasnodar Krai coast of the Black Sea. Unmanned Systems Forces Commander Robert Brovdy, known by his call sign Madyar, reported the strike directly on his Telegram channel. In his own words, the S-400 position in Gelendzhik, right on the shoreline near the catacombs, burned and smoldered for 3 hours. Brovdy specifically noted that this exact battery had launched 6 missiles the day before, between 9:25 in the morning and 12:51 in the afternoon on August 8th, meaning Ukraine identified and struck the specific system responsible for firing on Ukrainian territory less than 24 hours after those launches occurred. Now let's talk about where this S-400 was actually sitting, because the location is the part of this story that elevates it from a routine air defense strike into something with real symbolic significance. Gelendzhik sits on the Black Sea headland that holds a sprawling estate long reported, based on an investigation by the late Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation, to be Vladimir Putin's private palace. That complex covers roughly 17,700 square meters, and the Navalny investigation estimated its construction cost at a minimum of 100 billion rubles, somewhere around $1.2 billion. According to that same investigation, the grounds reportedly include a restaurant, a helipad, an ice arena, a church, an amphitheater, a guest house, extensive spa facilities, and an 80-meter bridge, all surrounded by a formal no-fly zone and roughly 7,000 hectares of land reportedly controlled by Russia's FSB. This is not an obscure or lightly defended piece of territory. It's one of the most heavily protected private residences in Russia, and the S-400 battery burning on its coastline for 3 hours is a direct statement about the actual limits of that protection. Let me pause here and give you the analysis, because how Ukraine actually got close enough to strike this specific S-400 matters just as much as the strike itself. This wasn't an isolated hit. It was the culmination of a short, deliberate sequence of strikes against layered defenses protecting that exact stretch of coastline. 2 days earlier, on August 7th, a separate Ukrainian strike destroyed the Volna Kupol Garant electronic warfare system deployed at Russian military unit number 2156 in the same area. That system was specifically designed to jam Starlink satellite communications and protect an area of roughly 20 square kilometers around it. According to military analyst Yan Matveyev, cited in Russian and international reporting on this story, the Volna Kupol Garant is genuinely effective against drones, but it comes with a significant vulnerability. Its sheer physical size, roughly comparable to a small military base, makes it easy to identify from the air. Its destruction was confirmed independently through satellite imagery, and critically, taking that jamming system offline is what allowed Ukrainian drones, no longer fighting through disrupted Starlink connectivity, to close the remaining roughly 500 meters and reach the S-400 position sitting right next to it. That sequencing tells you this wasn't a single lucky strike against an exposed target. It was a methodical two-step operation. First blind and disable the electronic warfare system specifically protecting that stretch of coast from drone interference. Then use the resulting clear connectivity to strike the far more valuable air defense system it had been shielding. That's a genuinely sophisticated operational pattern, identifying the specific piece of defensive infrastructure standing between your drones and the real target, taking it out first, and only then moving on the primary objective. Now let's talk about the rest of what got hit in that same overnight operation, because the S-400 was far from the only target. According to Brovdy's own reporting, 4 additional Russian air defense elements were destroyed the same night, spread across 2 different Russian regions. In Rostov region, Ukrainian forces destroyed a Tor short-range air defense system near the village of Putovoy, along with a Podlet K-1 radar station in Golovatovka and a Kosta 2E2 radar station in Latonovo. In Krasnodar Krai, alongside the Gelendzhik S-400, Ukrainian forces also destroyed a Pantsir S-1 missile and gun system in Yeysk. On top of all of that air defense infrastructure, the same operation struck 3 vessels linked to Russia's sanctions-evading shadow fleet in the Black Sea, 1 oil tanker and 2 dry cargo ships, credited to the 413th Regiment and a separate unit, the 412th Brigade known as Nemesis. That's 6 confirmed military and maritime targets, spanning 2 regions and multiple target categories, air defense, radar, and shadow fleet shipping, all disabled in a single coordinated night. I want to spend a moment on why an S-400 firing missiles offensively, the way this specific battery did on August 8, represents a notable shift worth understanding. The S-400 was designed as an air defense system, built to intercept incoming aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic threats. But missile analysts tracking this war have noted that Russia has increasingly repurposed S-400 interceptor missiles for offensive strikes against ground targets, a trend driven at least in part by pressure on Russia's own dedicated offensive missile stockpiles. According to missile expert Fabian Hoffman, these repurposed interceptors are less accurate and less lethal than dedicated strike missiles, but they still pose a genuine threat to civilian infrastructure, particularly when fired at densely populated areas. That context matters for understanding exactly what this specific S-400 was doing before Ukraine struck it. It wasn't purely defending Russian airspace, it was actively firing offensively into Ukraine, which is precisely why Ukrainian forces prioritized identifying and destroying that specific position within 24 hours of its last launch. I want to walk through why the S-400 specifically carries so much weight as a target, beyond just its symbolic proximity to the palace. The S-400 Triumf is Russia's premier long-range air defense system, capable of engaging aerial targets at ranges up to roughly 400 kilometers depending on the missile variant used, and capable of engaging ballistic missile targets as well. It's the rough Russian equivalent of the American Patriot system, and it's expensive, complex, and genuinely difficult to replace quickly. Earlier this year, this channel covered a separate strike where Ukraine's Special Operations Forces destroyed an S-400 launcher and its associated 92 N6E radar in Crimea, with reporting at the time describing the loss of that radar specifically as critical, since it functions as the system's primary detection and tracking capability, its eyes, in effect. Losing an entire S-400 position, launcher and supporting infrastructure together, isn't a minor tactical setback for Russia. Each battery represents a significant fraction of the country's total layered air defense coverage across an enormous amount of territory, and Russia doesn't have unlimited numbers of these systems to simply redistribute every time one gets destroyed. There's also a broader inventory pressure story here, worth connecting to what we've discussed about this specific S-400 firing offensively. Ukrainian President Zelensky has stated publicly that most of Russia's key ballistic missile manufacturers are circumventing sanctions to keep producing weapons, even as Ukraine itself faces a shortage of interceptor missiles for its own air defense. That imbalance, Russia still managing to sustain missile production despite sanctions pressure, while Ukraine's supply of interceptors capable of shooting those missiles down remains constrained, is part of the broader strategic picture explaining why Russia has increasingly leaned on repurposed S-400 interceptors as offensive weapons in the first place. If Russia's dedicated offensive missile stockpile were fully meeting operational demand, there would be considerably less incentive to pull interceptor missiles away from their original air defense role and fire them at Ukrainian territory instead. Let me also address something honestly, because this area of Krasnodar Krai has seen a genuinely tragic incident in the days just before this strike, and I don't think it's right to cover this story without acknowledging it. On August 3rd, a drone came down on a beach at Arkhippo-Osipovka, a settlement that's part of the greater Gelendzhik municipal area, roughly 22 kilometers from the palace complex. Russian authorities reported that the incident killed multiple civilians, with different reports citing either 6 or 7 deaths, including children, and dozens more injured. The exact cause and responsibility for that specific incident isn't something I can confirm from available open-source reporting. Whether it was a Ukrainian drone, intercepted debris from Russian air defense fire, or some other cause remains genuinely unclear from what's publicly available. I'm including it here not to draw a firm conclusion, but because it happened in the same immediate area just days before this S-400 strike, and honest coverage of this region right now shouldn't leave that out. Let me widen the lens on the broader campaign this fits into, because Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces have not treated this Gelendzhik operation as an isolated event. According to reporting on the unit's history in this specific area, the regiment that struck the S-400 position had hunted launchers like this one before, part of what multiple outlets have described as a systematic, ongoing campaign to dismantle Russia's broader air defense network, region by region. This channel has already tracked several chapters of that exact same campaign: the 4 radar strike in Krasnodar just days ago, the 7 radar operation in early August, the S-400 launcher and 96 L6 radar destroyed near the Crimean bridge back in late July, and the Magura naval platform strikes on additional S-400 launchers and a UAV control antenna in Crimea earlier this month. Every one of these operations serves the same underlying strategic purpose this channel has covered before: degrading the sensor and interceptor network that would otherwise detect and respond to Ukraine's deep strike drones and missiles, clearing an increasingly wide corridor for exactly the kind of 1,000-mile-plus strikes on refineries and production facilities this channel has documented throughout the summer. There's a broader symbolic point worth dwelling on before we get to the caveats, because it connects back to something this channel discussed when covering the Nove Zhitia artillery repair base and the earlier radar campaigns across Crimea. Throughout this war, one of the quiet assumptions underpinning Russia's sense of security has been that certain places, deep rear areas, symbolically important sites, the personal residences of senior leadership, simply sit outside the practical reach of Ukrainian strikes. Each time that assumption gets tested and fails, whether it's a refinery over 1,000 miles from the border, a strategic bomber base, or now an air defense system protecting the reported private residence of the Russian president himself, it chips away at a broader psychological confidence that has mattered as much to sustaining Russia's war effort as any single piece of hardware. A government that can no longer assume its own leadership's personal security infrastructure is beyond reach, is operating under a materially different set of assumptions than the one that started this war. Let me be fair here about what remains uncertain. We're relying primarily on Ukraine's own reporting, through Commander Brovdy's telegram statements, for the specific details of this operation, since Russia's defense ministry has offered no meaningful public accounting of the losses at Gelendzhik or the surrounding sites. We don't have independent confirmation of the exact extent of damage to the S-400 system itself, beyond footage and satellite imagery showing the position burning for an extended period. And we don't know whether Russia will attempt to reposition a replacement S-400 battery to protect this specific stretch of coastline, or whether the loss of both the jamming system and the air defense battery in the same week represents a more lasting gap in coverage around this particular location. Let me bring this together and give you the strategic assessment as I see it. Over 3 nights spanning August 7th through 9th, Ukraine methodically dismantled the layered defenses protecting the airspace over Gelendzhik, first destroying the Volna Kupol Garant electronic warfare system, shielding the area from drone interference, then using the resulting opening to strike the S-400 Triumf position it had been protecting, a system that had itself fired 6 missiles offensively into Ukraine just the day before. That strike came bundled with 4 additional air defense targets across Krasnodar and Rostov regions and 3 Shadow Fleet vessels in the Black Sea, all in a single overnight operation. And it happened directly on the doorstep of one of the most heavily guarded private residences in Russia, an estate long reported to belong to Vladimir Putin himself, protected by a formal no-fly zone and thousands of hectares of FSB-controlled land that, as of this week, no longer has the air defense battery that had been covering its coastline. Watch whether Russia attempts to rebuild air defense coverage over this specific stretch of coast quickly, because how fast Moscow prioritizes protecting this particular location again will tell us something about how seriously the Kremlin takes the symbolic exposure of this strike, separate from its purely tactical value. Watch whether Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces continue this exact pattern, electronic warfare system first, primary air defense target second, against other protected Russian coastal positions, because a repeatable 2-step method for cracking layered defenses is a capability that extends well beyond this single location. Watch whether the interceptor shortage on Ukraine's side and the sanctions-evading missile production on Russia's side continue to shape how each side allocates its air defense assets, because that broader imbalance is part of what pushed this specific S-400 into an offensive role in the first place. And watch how many more Russian air defense systems keep getting identified and struck within 24 hours of firing on Ukrainian territory, because that response time is itself a signal of how good Ukraine's real-time targeting intelligence against mobile air defense systems has become. This is Ben Hodges. Stay informed, and I'll see you with the next update.